Hello and welcome to the Canary Brief. Raging. In the last week, the crusty polyp, that is Dominic Cummings, was found to have broken his own lockdown rules with a 500-mile round trip to Durham in which he took a day out on his wife's birthday to Barnard Castle, in which they took COVID-19 from a hotspot in London to a rural area and into an NHS hospital. And Dominic Cummings' press conference was nothing more than a grown man behaving like a tiny child. He was admitting every accusation against him was true, but that he shouldn't be held responsible for those actions because special privilege. The public, civil society, and even our establishment press have expressed outrage, and justifiably so, that while families all across the country were making the most devastating and painful decisions regarding the health and emotional well-being of their own families in an effort to protect the country from a deadly virus, Dominic Cummings felt that those rules simply didn't apply to him. To give you some insight into just how painful those personal decisions were, I'd like to give you the example of the family of a 13-year-old child who had to die in hospital of coronavirus on his own, his parents unable to hold his hand as he left this earth and unable to attend his funeral to grieve him out of it because they were observing the rules that Dominic Cummings put in place.
Because of the need and the way that this virus itself is, no one else is allowed to be around that individual, and that means you're on your deathbed in your last moments alone. And he was a young boy, age 13, without his mother, without any sibling, on his deathbed in the last moments, and that's very hard to sort of digest. The family has yet to be able to grieve. They're yet to bury the Ismail, and they're yet to sort of be able to close this chapter. And you can imagine, because of the virus itself, not being able to witness his burial, not being able to just deal with it very rapidly and quickly, having a lot of inquiries. The families, I'm sure they just wish that this is a nightmare that they wake up to realize is not actually real, and that's how it must feel like for them.
And while the outrage is justified, I believe the responses to it are wrong on two counts. One, the insistence on continually fact-checking Dominic Cummings in the hope to force him into taking any responsibility for his actions. This is not going to happen. These are not people with the adult level of maturity required to admit to making a mistake and to be accountable for that mistake. These people have demonstrated time and again that they only have the emotional maturity level of toddlers. Denial until caught out, and then a plea for special conditions. And secondly, unlike we're being told by a lot of the kind of regular pundits of our day that what is happening with Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson is unprecedented and a break with a history of accountability in government, we also know that is manifestly not true. This did not begin with Dominic Cummings, and it will not end with Dominic Cummings. And until we begin challenging the entire system of entitlement in this country among a political class that is completely dissociated from the rules and systems of government applied to the rest of us, it will continue to happen. By failing to accept he has made a mistake, Dominic Cummings is saying he cares more about his children and has more right to protect them than you, I, or the family of Ishmael. This is unacceptable, but it is also nothing new. If we just look at modern history, the Blair government went to war with Iraq, killing up to 1 million Iraqi citizens on an entirely bogus premise. Millions of Britons came out onto the streets to protest the illegality of that decision and the wrongness of the lies.
From the left, the right, from the radical to the uncommitted, they came. Whatever the figures, without doubt, one of the largest gatherings, let alone protest rallies, in English history.
But instead of responding to those pleas, the Blair government simply carried on regardless. ignoring public opinion entirely. And if you look at this performance Blair gave at the time, what is the difference between his attitude in this exchange with Jeremy Paxman and the attitude of Dominic Cummings to the journalists at the press conference held in the Rose Garden?
Well, you said of those UN resolutions and the sanctions which followed them in the year 2000, you said that they had contained him. What's happened since?
I didn't actually. I said they contained him up to a point. And the fact
I'm sorry,
is,
Prime Minister, we believe that the sanctions regime has effectively contained Saddam Hussein in the last 10 years. You said that in November 2000.
well, I can assure you, I've said every time I'm asked about this, they have contained him up to a point. And the fact is the sanctions regime was beginning to crumble. It's why, subsequent, in fact, to that quote, we had a whole series of negotiations about tightening the sanctions regime. But the truth is the inspectors were put out of Iraq, so we've had no...
They were not put out of Iraq, Prime Minister. That is just not true. The weapons inspectors left Iraq after being told by the American government that bombs would be dropped on the country.
I'm sorry, that is simply not right. What happened is that the inspectors told us that they were unable to carry out their work. They couldn't do their work because they weren't being allowed access to the sites. They detailed that in the reports to the Security Council. On that basis, we said they should come out because they couldn't do their job properly.
That wasn't what you said. You said they were thrown out of Iraq.
Well, they were effectively, because they couldn't do the work they were supposed to do.
They were not thrown out of Iraq,
No,
though. They withdrew.
And this is far from an isolated incident. Again, with the Blair government, Peter Mandelson was made minister without portfolio, but very shortly after that he was forced to resign for misconduct. Well, does that show accountability? Maybe, except just a couple of years later, Blair gave him another government job, this time Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. And again, within a couple of years, Mr Mandelson was again forced to resign for a second time for misconduct. So was that accountability? No, because what Tony Blair then did was made sure that Peter Mandelson got a comfortable, well-paid job as an EU Commissioner, which he continued until 2008, when Gordon Brown gave him another job in government, but this time making him a peer, a Lord of the Realm, Lord Mandelson, appointed to the House, impossible to impeach, and again central to government operations, being paid handsomely from the public purse to perform a function he had clearly established was not within his integrity set. The Cameron government decided to implement crushing austerity on the public sector. Nearly 1 million public sector employees fired, 20,000 police officers, 4 million children plunged into poverty, pensions raided, all to provide tax cuts for the same wealthy class that actually caused the crisis in the first place.
Yes, Tony, there will be disruption at ports because the Border Control Agency has said that it intends to strike, and there were warnings that people coming into Britain may face delays. But I'm here in central London with mainly teachers. This is their strike march. Other unions will be converging on Westminster later to hear speeches by their leaders. This essentially is against the government's austerity measures, but it's focused on pensions. And what they're most worried about is having to work longer for less. And they say that is not what the original deal and contract that they had with the government.
And despite protests against those cuts, they proceeded regardless. And not only did they proceed, but they accelerated. And in June of 2017, we had the Grenfell Tower fire.
Shortly before 1 o'clock on Wednesday morning, an inferno broke out in a tower block in West London.
Oh my God, they're screaming! Oh my God!
Scenes of unimaginable horror.
It was quite high up, like just above the middle, and she was screaming, "I've got a baby, please help me get out, I can't get out, I'm trapped, I need to save my baby."
As well as those of astonishing bravery.
As I was going downstairs, you had firefighters going up the stairs, brave firefighters going up the stairs.
The Prime Minister has finally announced a full public inquiry, and today the Chancellor's shock revelation that the cladding around the building may have been banned.
And yet 3 years after this crisis, not a single person has been held to account for it. And in fact, some of the surviving families still remain homeless. And that is why, even if we secure the resignation of Dominic Cummings, even if we topple the Johnson-Cummings government altogether, the people waiting in the wings to replace them have entirely the same level of disrespect for basic rules as those who came before them. So what do we do? Firstly, we stop fact-checking with the idea that poking holes in his Swiss cheese story is some kind of gotcha. He doesn't care. This behaviour keeps us occupied while he gets as much nefarious shit as possible done, then laughs at us and tosses us another piece of bullshit. We have to fight this culture war now because the other side is fighting and they are winning. That means getting down and dirty. Construct a narrative, repeat it incessantly, force them to defend it, move instantly on to the next without giving them a moment's pause. Wear them down. And you know what? Buy our own damn Facebook ads. Target their core demographics, but we hit them with the emotive reality of the failure of not just Cummings and Johnson, but capitalism itself, rather than statistics. We have one major advantage here. We don't need to make a thing up. The truth is on our side. It is highly unlikely that the mainstream media or the establishment itself will do this, because they will not risk upending capitalism, whatever the cost. They will only fight culture wars against the left, as seen with the war on Corbyn. And whether we like it or not, the Labour Party has been co-opted and neutered. And so this job will ultimately fall to us. We are going to need to organise on an unprecedented level. Civil groups, charities, unions, activist groups, independent media, the lot. We need to apply pressure throughout the system, using all the leverage we have. Stop working, stop paying rent, stop buying non-essential goods, target their infrastructure in smart ways that protects our communities but hurts capital. And we need to protect each other from their sanctions. If this sounds dramatic to you, it's because the crisis that we're in has simply been normalised. 120,000 dead from austerity, 63,000 dead from coronavirus, Windrush, Grenfell, zero accountability and never-ending lies and double standards. This isn't normal. This is horrific, but they will do worse. Much worse. It's not about if we do this, but when. Our only question is, how many hurt, hungry, sick, or dead Britons will it take for us to act? We can do this, we should do this, and we need to do it now.